Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this three-part series for discussing managing supplier diversity and really building a coordinated approach between those two operations. I'm Ken McDonald, founder of Source SCM Consulting, 30 years of sourcing and supply chain experience. And with me, I have three esteemed colleagues. Dana, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Dana Small. I work at BioMarin. I work in global strategic sourcing for the past 10 years and finance 15, mainly supporting global commercial function.
Thank you. Darren?
Hello, everyone. I'm Darren Harmon. I lead the Enterprise Supplier Diversity and Sustainable Procurement programs.
And Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. So my name is Mark Teedens. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Noosh. Noosh is a marketing production and execution software company involved in sustainability as well as supplier diversity in helping marketers buy better.
Today, we're really going to focus on kind of driving support and adoption of supplier diversity, really looking at the different program maturity that exists across the different companies domestically. And then how do we manage those transactions and costs, some of which we touched on in the first session. I think we'll get a little bit deeper too in this session. So thank you for joining us. As we look at, again, when we talked about some of the challenges, today we're looking at, how do we explore, well, let's explore the path to optimization. We talked about transparency, leveraging technology, driving adoption, really training and educating folks on what is supplier diversity and how do we maximize the opportunities available to us. And 59% of companies basically say that less than 10% of their supply base consists of diverse suppliers, with their top two challenges being stakeholder buy-in and getting adoption, and really just a shortage of qualified suppliers. And I think Darren touched on that earlier in the first session, is really understanding what product and services those suppliers can provide and making sure that you align that with the needs of the marketing teams and other business folks. So Dana, from a BioMarin standpoint, what steps has the company taken kind of really to look at growth of supplier diversity spend and just even advancing the opportunities that are available?
Yeah, so, from a sourcing standpoint of view, it's really our goal to have and to drive within the business. And I think the 53% of companies that struggle with lack of stakeholder buy-in is huge, right? I'm in sourcing, I'm the one reporting it, it's my goal. And when I go and try to explain that business case to, my marketing friends, they don't have that same goal. They just want to make sure they can, get things done and on time in a quick manner. And it also speaks to the shortage. So in marketing, there aren't a lot of small, diverse suppliers. There are these huge agency holding companies that typically kind of run the gamut. So not only do I have a challenge of trying to get them to understand why I'm pushing for a small, diverse supplier, but then I also have the challenge of trying to find a small, diverse supplier in the space. So it's twofold. And I think, the technology is one place that can definitely help. But it's just trying to get that internal alignment and management support, having an overall strategy, knowing that, as any pharmaceutical, patients are our focus. And so we do have these larger supplier diversity programs that look at not only, spends, but just kind of corporate responsibility and all the goals that go along with that. So I think having that executive level support and management helps kind of drive it, but I definitely think there are some really key challenges in just trying to gain, adoption from the business partners when it's not their goal. Their goal is to, to market, to get things to sell. And so to have a diverse supplier be a goal for them, to have, more spend with them, it's definitely a struggle. But, we continue to use our tools and we continue to use executive level support to be able to kind of push that through to the business, and hopefully they'll align with our goals and, take on smaller diverse suppliers and at least incorporate them into, RFPs and things of that sort.
So Darren, from a United Health Group standpoint, what are some of the key area of focus as you look at the value proposition that you're trying to drive with supplier diversity?
I think there are a couple of really critical elements, Ken. I think support and engagement has to be both tops down and bottoms up to drive program sustainability. I think senior leadership advocacy, I should say, is key. Our C-suite is is very knowledgeable about supplier diversity and committed to driving progress in this area and has committed resources to doing that. I also believe, education and training is critically important. Employees need to be clear on the value proposition behind why we do what we do as it relates to the practice. I'd also state infrastructure and governance is also important. I know I'm kind of reiterating some of the themes that Dana tapped into, but I think the best programs that I've seen have supplier diversity seamlessly integrated into their core procurement and business processes, which includes having good technology that would provide visibility to diverse supplier base, as well as effective reporting, as well as good governance, which would include goals not only for the procurement team, but goals for your business partners as well. And that's something that we're currently working on at United Health. But we think once we fully have that established, we will see our growth in supplier diversity spend accelerate tremendously.
So Mark, at Noosh, have you had clients come to you try to help you? I think the CSuite Adoptions is a very critical point as we talk about executives and buying into the programs. Have you had any of your clients kind of come to you and say, how do we solve this problem, or how can technology be leveraged to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, the themes that, Dana and Darren have been talking about, we see throughout enterprises in the United States. And as I mentioned in the last session, globally. And so the question from us as a technology provider is, how do you pull the data, forward into the buying processes? And there's all kinds of issues associated with it, right? There's data quality, there's self-certification versus not. Where does it come from? Historically, the portal metaphor of having suppliers keep their data up to date in a portal, and we tried it. Honestly, Noosh tried it. Yeah, it's imperfect, right? Because suppliers don't update it as often as you want them to ensure that there's a high degree of data efficacy. So there's definitely ways around that. So integrating with third-party data partners, for example. But then pulling it forward is again, it's putting the data in front of the buyer in an easy to see way so that they can act according to the goals of the organization that have been placed on them. So, the best conversations we like to have is when a client says, "Hey, our corporate objective is now X." Or it's to incorporate, X percentage of our marketing spend in with diverse suppliers. So how do we do that? So that's how we typically respond.
So Darren, how at United do you guys approach bringing that visibility to the C-level folks? Maybe give us a couple of things that maybe United's doing that others should maybe take measure on. Or how do you bring that visibility of all the transactions and the data and the spend that's going on, and the advantages the supplier diversity can bring? How do you bring that up to that C-level and get them to be aware of what's going on?
A couple ways, Ken. First is, I think, effective reporting. And so I'll just give you a couple examples. So United just issued its first United Health Group sustainability report, I think back in June or July. And within the report, there is a nice section on supplier diversity that speaks to the program, some of the practices that we've put in place, but also provides reporting on the progress that we've made in Tier 1 and Tier 2 spend, as well as economic impact in the communities that we serve. And I think that served as a way to not only educate our senior leadership to a certain extent, but also drive greater awareness externally of the work that United Health is doing with supplier diversity. Another key approach that we've put in place is supplier diversity is aligned in procurement at United Health, which aligns up through corporate services or our finance organization. And so I have an opportunity to update our chief financial officer once or twice a year on the progress that we're making in our program, get some of his insights on ways to drive further growth of the program. And that level of visibility is key because as he learns more about the program, he's taking that into other discussions that he's having and making sure that we're resourced appropriately to drive further growth. And then lastly, I think that, the organization more broadly has put in place an effort to strengthen its focus around inclusion and diversity, of which supplier diversity is a key component. And through that effort, we have direct visibility to the CEO and other leaders across the organization. And we're leveraging that exposure to drive greater levels of awareness and engagement with some of our business partners as we think about new ways or innovative ways to drive the growth of the program. And so there are a few instances that speak to how we're able to connect with senior leadership to really drive program growth tops down. And, obviously we're working bottoms up to make sure that our partners have the level of technology that they need to drive greater visibility to diverse suppliers, as well as different approaches that we can take to try and ensure diverse suppliers are given opportunities to compete.
Yeah, all key points. Thank you. I think it's very important to just understand how do we bring that visibility to leadership and show them some of the, as you talked about, economic impact and the value proposition of using diverse suppliers. So as we move into program maturity, just doing research and just reading some of the periodicals out there, you understand there's a very wide variance when you talk about tools, resources, technology. Some companies manage it internally. Some companies actually use external supplier diversity management companies. Some companies have policies and procedures in place, diversity goals, KPIs that they measure, some of which has been touched on in our discussion to this point. When you really look at it, it's, the statistics show that 75% of organizations have a supplier diversity strategy, with 40% of those having a supplier diversity strategy from marketing folks. And so, Mark, I guess I'd ask you is kind of, what do you think really drives those numbers that are coming out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, well, I think the most interesting thing about those numbers is that there's a, corporate wide, there's, the vast majority or the majority, with, 3/4 of them having a supplier diversity strategy, and yet marketing has a far less maturity, right? With only 40% there. And, there's a couple different reasons for that. One is one of the reasons that Dana had mentioned, previously. It's like some of the, the marketing vendors are these large holding companies, right? That, that are just hard to find, right? So there's consolidated spend. And yet at the same time, the flip side of that is that marketing also is a very long tail spend category with lots of smaller vendors, right? And often the spend with any one of those vendors is smaller than that which people start tracking for diversity spend, right? It's small odds and ends. So I think that the trick is well, how do you capture that spend in a way that's not, completely labor intensive with a data approach where you say, well, okay, if I can get a solid understanding of what that long tail looks like with diverse certifications or small business certifications, I may be able to identify diverse spend that I didn't even know I had, right? Just by having better data on the back end of it. So I think what those numbers really point to is that there is a really large opportunity for a more coordinated and consolidated approach, specifically with regards to marketing spend, by having a solid data strategy and then pulling that data in front of the marketers. Because again, the marketers are doing a lot of the buying. Strategic sourcing procurement folks, and I'll ask Dana to follow on this one. They typically are focused on kind of large contracts, large spend. There's a spend threshold before they need to get involved, et cetera, et cetera. Some of these small vendors, marketers are doing the work, and there's just lack of a visibility from a sourcing procurement standpoint. So as you're trying to report up to the CFO, some of that might just be lost because of the way that it is. So it's kind of an interesting piece of maturity, and then who's actually doing the actual buying as well.
Yeah, very good. Dana, how do you kind of see that from the point of view of a BioMarin?
Yeah, I think Having a supplier diversity strategy specifically for marketing and advertising would be extremely tough. As I pointed out before, when you look at what's in the type of spend for marketing, you typically have advertising agencies, you have print and promo, and you have Medcom agencies, you have data. So just by the sheer volume of that's typically advertising agencies and media, you have to almost go through these larger conglomerates. And Mark's point is true. It's a very large tail spend. So we will have smaller suppliers for one-off projects, but having a strategy specifically for marketing typically is something that I haven't seen in any of our organizations, but it's something that I think would be useful if we could get to that point. We're pretty small, but I think larger organizations who have a little bit more people and more support, right, can actively do that and go after. I know in talking with other people in the industry, even at Eli Lilly, she said, hey, I'm really having a hard time in this category specifically trying to find diverse suppliers. And so I actually pulled a list for her because it is such a struggle within the marketing category just in general. And so, you'll see when you talk to other colleagues that you're not alone in that. And then trying to have a goal for it on top of it, it makes it 10 times harder because there are so few of them and there are so few ways to actually find them and find good ones who eventually, like I said, because it's an advertising, will get swallowed up by these large holding companies, right? Typically, when you get these great new providers out, a holding company will see it and then they'll swoop them up. And guess what? That diverse supplier is now gone. And so you're back kind of at square one, trying to find other diverse suppliers to do this type of activities for you. So it's an interesting type of complex problem that we have, but I definitely think people are trying to address it with different things like, technology and that so forth.
What are some of the things or the steps you guys have taken that you can identify this diverse suppliers, make sure that there's, got the proper certifications and they meet the regulatory controls, and bring that visibility back into your procurement and marketing folks so they can make those decisions?
Well, we leverage a third party that provides visibility to who is certified across a variety of different classifications. We typically, get a data dump out of our ERP system, and we'll provide that information at a fairly high level to our third party to cleanse, right? To tell us basis a variety of different metrics who is certified. And we leverage that information then to feed it to our business partners and our procurement teams to try and drive focus on driving added inclusion of diverse suppliers, or to the extent possible across a variety of different areas. We are developing specific strategies. We're leveraging a variety of different approaches, work segmentation, supplier stratification, a number of different ways to develop specific strategies to drive engagement of diverse suppliers in different parts of our marketing spend, as well as more broadly across the enterprise. The one last point I'll make is, for diverse suppliers, and as we think of our objectives, ultimately, we're trying to provide additional opportunities for diverse suppliers. And that comes not only through tier 1 opportunities, but through tier 2 opportunities as well. And so in some instances, especially in some of these categories where it's a little more difficult because the market penetration of diverse suppliers may not be as broad as we'd like, we look to leverage our direct primes who may not be diverse to engage diverse suppliers within their business in support of United Health's business. And so the diverse supplier doesn't care if it comes from some of our larger businesses, our primes that we use, or if it comes directly from United Health. Either way, they're getting the business, and that's helping them grow and develop capabilities that position them for sustainable success. And so it's an approach that I like to communicate to folks who might be having difficulty in always driving tier 1 spend.
Yeah, very good point. And I think another thing that's out there in the marketplace that's been a little bit disrupted because of COVID is when you look at some of the conferences you can go to and you can actually meet and greet and understand what some of these diverse suppliers go to. Very beneficial in the couple that I've been able to be a part of. And I think that's one of the challenges in doing some of the research when you read it is how do the diverse suppliers get an audience? And those conferences, right, seminars, and some of that really helps create that audience that they're looking for, just saying, let me get a chance to get in front of somebody to try to, sell the services and the value I can bring to your organization versus, just hoping that you find them in some sort of research, or like Mark, you brought up Tealbook earlier and some of the other tools that are out there. Is hopefully all that helps gain some of that visibility that diverse suppliers are looking to get with the large and medium organizations. So good. Thank you, guys. As we move into kind of the transparency piece, a key driver for optimization, as we talked about, is really transparency of the data. When you think of timely, accurate transactional and spend data, you think about getting it in kind of a real-time mode, so you have that ability to make and drive decisions. We talked earlier in the discussion about RFPs and including diverse suppliers in those RFPs. And that's really kind of a big driver, because if you look at some of the statistics, 35% of marketing leaders say that they're using Office software, they're using Excel, they're using email, they're using SharePoints and some of the side of the desk type stuff. And then 36% say they really don't have a process to measure the use of diverse suppliers. I think that creates some of the bigger challenges, some of which we've touched on already. But as we look at it, Darren, I'll start with you, is how does United, or how did they kind of mature into having the data capture that you have today, and what are you looking to kind of do to drive it and even advance it further? We talk about transparency in that whole spend and data capture process.
Well, as I mentioned, Ken, it's important for us to try and ensure that we are capturing business, capturing spend and driving growth with businesses that have been certified. In most instances, 51% owned, operated, and controlled by someone of a diverse classification. And we leverage a third party for that information. And so we'll capture the information accordingly. We scrub our supplier lists at least 2 or 3 times a year. And leveraging that third party is critical for us to ensure that we are in fact, viewing suppliers that have been certified through one of the numerous organizations out there as being diverse, and it makes us feel better about the results that we report as it relates to our program. I think driving that visibility, we've obviously looked to implement that into, or integrate that, I should say, into our systems to make sure that visibility is widespread, not only across our procurement teams, but across our business partners as well. And we use a variety of different technological tools to help drive that visibility with both of those groups that I just mentioned. That's critical. So as they're issuing RFPs, they can ensure inclusion of diverse suppliers as part of those opportunities, whether it's the procurement team who issues most of the RFPs, as well as our businesses who are engaged in the process, understanding where who the diverse suppliers are, what their capabilities are, and through, again, a different level of taxonomy, understanding what specifically they're doing for United Health makes it a lot easier to get the diverse suppliers engaged and provide business opportunities.
Okay. So Dana, how at BioMarin, how does that data capture process work? Or is it very similar to what Darren's talking about, or do you guys have kind of a different approach?
Yeah, I mean, we have a different approach. We don't have anything outsourced. And honestly, I think because it's in the pharmaceutical industry, it's really driven right by this regulation and this yearly reporting. But it's hard because to measure the use of it, just to even identify it has been tough in the past. Like if you take a look at pharmaceuticals over the past decade, we didn't have a really good way or a robust way to be able to pull all that data in and to be able to see who they are, let alone to actually measure it, right? So that's kind of, I think, a step two. Step one, we're starting to see new technology, as I mentioned before, like Tealbook, to be able to at least identify it. The measuring, the actual use of it, it kind of comes after it. But I think, there are a lot of issues with trying to measure it and trying to plan for it at the same time. And unfortunately, it's just a very manual process. 35% of leaders saying they use traditional office software as spreadsheets. I'm not surprised because honestly, before this, it really did used to take us months to try to identify it, make sure they're updated, go and check websites for, small minority-owned businesses. We still will take what we have and still go through that process to some degree. So even though we can get a report from, say, Tealbook, we still have to go and validate, hey, these are the diverse suppliers and here are the categorizations and everything's up to date. So I think, trying to then measure and have a process to be able to accurately measure them is definitely like a step two that I don't think we've actually gotten to, or a lot of pharmaceuticals have gotten to, because we're just still trying to conquer step one. But I think having the technology that's gotten us at least through step one now quickly, we can at least now turn to phase two and say, what else can we do now to enhance that technology, to try to be able to measure what we're doing, how we're using it. And I think it comes down to the fact that sourcing too, it's on us, it's our goals. And so for us to measure it and stay on top of it and have reviews, I think is key, right? That we really need to take it on as a focus to really measure how we're doing against our own internal goals and not just having it as, a regulatory driven type event.
Yeah, well, thank you. Mark, any additional thoughts? We talked about transparency and just the whole data management process.
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, that those stats around 35 and 36%, when we go into an organization 90% of the time, marketers who are managing production processes, whether it be print or print promo or the categories, production of adaptations and so forth, usually it is a Word or spreadsheet based process for the marketers to work with their agency suppliers. Granted, the spend eventually makes it into some sort of ERP system, but it's really just a recording of a transaction, right? It doesn't really kind of capture what's happening up front during that collaborative process. I mean, marketing procurement or marketing production execution is part project management and part procurement. They kind of go hand in hand. It's what makes it kind of unique. So that transparency is something that we've always done in terms of spend. We've always maintained a really strong kind of data structure and method for marketers to work with their third parties to capture spend. Well, the next piece after that is what we're talking about today is like, well, okay, spend capture and visibility by specification, by category, or contract rules, or that's something that we've always done. But now pulling data around that supplier diversity upfront to the marketers as they're making their decisions or something, and then recording it such that we can, report out not only from a spend management standpoint, but also by all the different categories that are maintained, in the system. And the way we keep that data up to date, we actually have two methods. We support the ability for a user to go in and after the data has been kind of, vetted, we can, a user can go in and make sure the data is up to date manually, or we have a partnership with Tealbook where the data gets fed in automatically for those certifications on a kind of on a call by call basis by just clicking a link. It'll be updated, and then the reports just come out as kind of the natural kind of step of doing business. It's what we do.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think very good points from all three of you on that one. So as we move in, thank you again for attending this particular session. We focused a lot on the optimization of supplier diversity and some of the benefits it can bring, the maturity of the different programs around large and small organizations, and then really looked at that kind of data transparency piece. I'd like to thank again Dana, Dara, and Mark for their input. I hope you'll join us for the third and final session, which will talk about advancing supplier diversity opportunities. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.